Okay, everybody. We are actually here at Children's Book World because we did not want to miss the opportunity to make it feel like a party. We are, of course, celebrating Christine Kendall's launch of her book, The True Definition of Never Being. Let's make some noise. We are super excited to be here. I'm here with Christine Kendall, Meg Medina, and Laurie Tharps. I'm going to get to some introductions in a minute. I first want to tell everybody that there is an ability to ask questions. So, but once the conversation is over, we're going to open it up to questions. If you type in your comment field, we will be able to get to your question. So type away, feel free to say hi, send your love, all of that good stuff. I also want to let you know that these lovely books behind me are signed by Christine because she was able to come by, being a Philly girl and us being a store right near Philly. So please feel free to order a book off our website. Of course, we have Meg's books and we have Laurie's books. But I do want to say something. If you have an independent bookstore in your neighborhood, if you are lucky enough, please feel free to support them. It's not an easy time for bookstores right now. So we want to try to send the love out to everybody. If you support them today, they will be here for you tomorrow. But we've also gotten very good at shipping. So if you're not fortunate enough to have one, we got your back. All right, like I said, we are here to celebrate the true definition of never been. And I just fell in love with this book. I want to be part of this family. I want Nana. Stay with me. Tell you a little bit about Christine. Christine grew up in a family of artists, the fourth of 6 children where everyone studied piano along with one other instrument. She still feels sorry for the neighbors. They woke up one morning and found themselves living next door to a flute, 2 clarinets, a French horn, a cello, a set of drums, and always someone on the piano. Yeah. Christine wasn't good at the piano or the clarinet, but she loved writing, so we lucked out. Her short fiction has appeared in numerous literary journals. Her debut novel, Riding Chance, was nominated for the NAACP Image Award in the category of Outstanding Literary Work for Youth and Teens. Christine lives in Philly, where she co-curates and hosts the award-winning reading series, Creative at the Cannery. And joining Christine this evening is Meg Medina, a Newbery-winning and New York Times bestselling author who writes picture books as well as middle grade and young adult fiction. Her works have been called heartbreaking, lyrical, and must-haves for every collection, and that is truth. Her books have won an amazing amount of awards, not the least of which was 2019's Newbery Medal for Mercy Suarez Changes Gears. And her newest book, which I absolutely adore, Evelyn Del Rey is Moving Away, a word of warning to parents who want to read this to your child. Pre-read this unless you want to be hysterical when you turn the last page in front of your children. It's so good. You'll also end up running and texting your best friend from childhood. I did that too. When Meg is not writing, she works on community projects that support girls, Latinx youth, and literacy. She serves on the National Board of Advisors for the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and is a faculty member of Hamline University's Masters of Fine Arts in Children's Literature, and she lives with her family in Richmond, Virginia. And last but certainly not least, our next Philly girl, Laurie Tharps, is a storyteller who her work lands at the intersection of race and real life. She's a journalist, author, educator, speaker, mother, superhero. What don't you do, Laurie? She uses her words to broaden the conversation about race in America. She celebrates diversity, kicks rocks at racism, and has a story about Black hair for every occasion. Laurie's the award-winning author of 4 critically acclaimed nonfiction books, including Hair Story, Kinky Gazpacho, the best title ever, Same Family, Different Colors, and Substitute Me. And I have to say, we don't have a huge adult section in our store, but we have carried Same Family, Different Colors since it was in hardback I love that book. So thank you. So I am so excited. I am going to disappear for a little bit to let these lovely authors converse and celebrate Christine. I will be back. Enjoy.
Thank you, Heather.
I feel outnumbered by Philly, and I know so many great people who live in Philly, especially in children's books. So now I'm thinking maybe I need to move to Philly.
Well, now you're a part of our family. You don't even have
Okay.
to.
All right. Good deal. Good deal.
So thank you everyone for coming. This is such a thrill to be here tonight. It's been, a long haul. Lots of folks told me that the second book can be harder than the first one, and now I really know what that means. But today, Neva Bean is out in the world, and I'm excited.
It sure is. It's beautiful. Look at this gorgeous cover.
Yes.
I know. That has got to be one of the best.
gorgeous.
Pat Cummings did the cover. I think she did a fabulous job.
Pat!
Yes.
She's great. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful.
So, Christine, can I start out by asking you a question?
Sure. That's why you're here.
So I read The True Definition of Neva Bean, and while I was already excited because one, the little girl has natural hair on the cover and lots of words in her hair, two things near and dear to my heart, like writing and hair. But of course, when I read the book, I was struck because I felt like I had just read The Black Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, in the sense that here was this book that felt the same, like it gave me the same feelings that I had when I was maybe 12 and read Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, and had found this book that talked about what it meant to become, going from girlhood to woman, and not a full blown teenager, but the things that start happening kind of internally that make you starting to be a woman and yet still feeling like a little girl. And that's this special feeling that I got when I finished reading Neva Bean. So tell us, everybody who's watching, did you set out to write the definitive story about, moving from girlhood into adult or womanhood, if you will? Because it feels like you nailed it. You nailed all those feelings and all those emotions.
Lori, thank you so much for saying that. That is truly an honor. And I wish I could say that, yes, I did have that in mind, but I didn't. The story is actually a little bit complicated, but a little bit simple also. I moved to West Philly about 4 years ago, and we live in a condo on a corner. And I like to look out the window and see what's going on in the neighborhood. Okay, maybe I'm the nosy lady in the window, but I like to watch the kids going back and forth on the way to school, playing, doing whatever it is that kids do. And I often see little girls walking up and down the street, and they fascinate me because a lot of them seem to know who they are. They have this strong sense of self. But then there's a bunch of them who seem to be unsure, seem to be incredibly tentative. And I'm sitting here saying to myself, I wonder what it's like to be 12 years old now. It's been a very long time since I was 12, and we're now in a very different world, in a very different place. And so I started thinking about what would this girl's story be? A young girl living in this West Philly neighborhood that is progressive and is politically active. And here she is at this point where she's moving from young girlhood into adolescence, unsure of herself because of the changes taking place in her body, and just what would that feel like now? So that's what led me to writing the book. But I should add one other thing to that, and I wonder if either of you have ever had this experience. Very often when I'm out and about in the world, young girls are waving at me. Have you ever experienced that? For instance, when I lived in Harlem, I had to take the subway at 145th Street. And it's a very, very, very long escalator going from the subway platform up to the street. And one day I was standing on the platform waiting for a train, and a young girl who looked like she was about 10 or 11 was on her way up the escalator, and she just started waving at me. And I never saw this girl before. I didn't know who she was. She was just waving, waving, waving. And I waved back, and she waved at me until she was out of sight all the way up the escalator. And that sort of thing has happened to me a couple of times since. For instance, here in Philly, sometimes I like to walk along the Schuylkill River Trail. One day I was walking and a group of girls came by, young girls. They were with maybe a camp counselor. And so as I walked by, two of the girls just started waving at me. And I thought, oh, so these girls see me and I want to let them know that I see them as well. So that was really what was driving me. I wanted to let these girls know that I see them as well as they are seeing me.
Well, I want to jump in with the notion of seeing, because I'm with Lori. That first scene where she's in front of the mirror and she's caught admiring herself, basically, right? And so isn't that something, that becomes a source of like embarrassment for her and shame. And I was really fascinated in all the ways that that people made judgments of the girls. Michelle, for example, is a good example, and Neva, based on their clothing and based on how politically active they were. Like all of these coming of age things that have to do with your physical self.
Yeah.
I thought that was just so well done and so true in terms of how people read girls as they develop. And that really uncomfortable moment when we move from girlhood, playing outside, kickball, having ice cream, like all the things of early childhood. And then suddenly there are other expectations and other, these sort of sneaky worries that our parents have around us and her grandparents have around her. I thought that was just so well done.
Thank you. Well, Neva's very confused about that because she just started wearing a bra and she loves it. It makes her feel like a woman and she knows she's beautiful. And she is caught in this moment by someone else. She's seen in this very private moment and she's humiliated by that. And so maybe what I'd like to do right now is to read briefly that scene, which I call the mirror scene.
Yay!
So you
One
can
of
get
my
a sense
favorites.
of Neva's voice. So what you need to know to understand the scene is that Neva and her friend Jamila have been outside in her front garden. They normally start in the front garden every morning and decide how they're going to spend the day. And so there's a new girl on the block, Michelle, who's more developed than they are physically and more sophisticated than they are politically. And so Neva is fascinated by Michelle, and she can't quite figure out what it is about Michelle that she finds so fascinating. But since she started wearing a bra, she has to go to the mirror and check herself out many times a day. So there's an awkward silence between me and Jamila, and she's the one to break it. Okay, Neva, she says, standing up, talk to you later. I lower my eyes as if I'm fascinated by something in the garden. I don't want to say anything to stop my friend Jamila from leaving because something's pulling me back into the house. Something having to do with Michelle Overton, the new girl on the block, and my profile. I need to see it again. My profile, that is. I need to check it out. I've only done this about 8 million times this past week since I got my new bra. I don't hear anybody upstairs, so the coast must be clear. The problem is the mirror in my room is too small. So is the mirror in the bathroom. I need a bigger mirror to really check everything out, so I go into my grandparents' bedroom to the biggest mirror in the house. I stand in front of my grandparents' bureau and smile. I love the way I look, starting with my new do, my twists. So I gently pat my hair before turning to the side to admire my body. I lift my lavender t-shirt so I can see the glorious white cotton status symbol against my walnut flesh. Yeah, I'm all that. Michelle Overton might be going to high school, but she's got nothing on me. I admire myself from the front, from the back, from the left, and from the right. I do this over and over again until I am dizzy. I don't know how long I have been posing when the door to my grandparents' bathroom flies open and my brother Clayton falls out. He screeches, screams, shrieks, hollers, and howls his way across the room. Clay is laughing so hard he can hardly walk. Do you hear what I'm saying? His eyes are sealed shut as he gasps for air, struggling to regain control of his heaving shoulders. He falls to his knees and bangs his right fist on the floor like a judge trying to keep order in his court. He staggers to his feet and roars past me without saying a word. So that's Neva's Bing's low point, if you will. But she rises above it, right?
It's so familiar, though. So familiar. I mean, the whole standing in front of the mirror. I mean, guilty as charged. Like, it took me right back to my parents' room because they had the full-length mirror. You know, it's that's what I mean, is that it's like you've captured these moments. And I don't think I've thought about those moments. I don't think, when you're thinking like, oh, what was it like going from teenage, from being a child to being a young woman or into adolescence and teenhood. But you've captured so many of those moments, those really kind of special moments, but moments that, again, it's so easy to forget because they weren't punctuated by something, really traumatic or something. And I think that's what I really appreciated about this story. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit about, this isn't a book that has, death and destruction and, there's not trauma. And yet I think it's a quiet story. And yet it's so relevant and resonant for so many people. Talk about like what kind of story you wanted to tell and who you wanted to really reach with this story.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted people to see, I see them. I love that idea that these girls, you see them. Talk about who you were writing for.
Yeah, once I realized I wanted to write this book mainly for young girls, but I think boys can enjoy the book as well, but mainly for young girls. I started to do some research and I learned that very often when girls start to develop physically, they experience this loss of confidence. And it might be that they were much more confident of themselves as younger children, but now when their body starts changing and people start responding to them differently, they lose the confidence that they had. And boys sometimes experience a loss of confidence, but girls seem to more so. And so girls spend a lot of time ruminating. So in the book, I have Neva Bean spending a lot of time worrying about, oh, what's going to happen if I do this? What's going to happen if I do that? As opposed to taking action. She stands around worrying all the time. And the reality is girls should be encouraged to take more risks. Sometimes you will fail, but you have to put yourself out in the world. You have to take risks because that's the only way you'll develop resilience. And resilience is a skill that we all need. And so Neva is in this process of trying to define herself. And she does that through her examination of words, her own words, as well as the words used by others, because she's really trying to figure out who she is, who she has become. And it's weird, she doesn't really understand it because it's not that she doesn't know she's beautiful. It's not that she doesn't know she's smart, but something is getting in the way there. Something is stopping her from being her true self. So she's really looking to define herself.
I would like to jump in because the other part that is so incredibly done and relevant, I think, about this novel now is her relationship of who she is as it relates to activism, right, in her community. So what kind of activist does she want to be? And I thought you really drew so many options there, right? And finding your voice, not having to be a process of recreating a new persona for yourself, but sort of discovering who it is that you are and matching with how you want to move through the world. I mean, the piece on how she decides how she is going to advocate for her community was I thought really amazing. How did you come to that particular plot line?
Yeah, I think I wanted to show that there are different ways of being and that the various ways of being are not wrong. The important thing is that you have to figure out what's right for you. So Neva becomes more aware of some of the political issues in her neighborhood through her brother's relationship with Anton, and he's involved with collecting books and so on. And so she starts to think about, what's going on there? Books are involved with words. Words are something that I love. Maybe this is something I can care about. This is something that I should think about. And at the same time she's thinking about this, she's looking at Michelle, and Michelle's father is a community activist. Michelle's much more involved. Michelle's out there leading youth groups. And Neva doesn't really think that that's the way she wants to go. But she has to do something. And she spends a lot of time in the book being confused about what, if anything, her role can be. But then in the end, she figures out that it's through words that she can be useful to her community. It's through words that she can bring joy to the other people in her life. So I mainly wanted to show that there's no one way of being an activist, or there's no one way of being involved in social change. It's really a matter of your getting to know yourself, figuring out if you want to be involved, and if so, staying true to yourself and finding the right path.
Yeah, I like that. I liked that also. I mean, that was another way that I felt, obviously it felt very authentic to her character, right? That she didn't suddenly become a whole different person, which I think is really important for children's literature, because we read these books to kind of get an idea of what we're supposed to do, right? These, for a lot of young people, this is instructional, right? Or these are role models. And I think that Neva is, will be a relief for many young girls to say, okay, I don't have to go out and do this thing that I'm not really comfortable doing. I can do this other thing. And I feel like, Neva at one point, she chose to be a friend to her friend, right? Like that was admirable, right? That there's a lot of ways to be a good person, to support humanity, whatever it was. And I like, again, I call this like a quiet story, right? In the sense that she didn't become somebody totally different, which is not realistic. And I think that sets kids up for, this idea that somehow they have to transform, that they're going to be like a caterpillar to a butterfly. No. That's Mother Nature. Like that metamorphosis not happening. And that's not realistic. That's why I think I likened it to that Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, because that book was, I think, about getting your period and getting a bra. Like that's just nothing like really, nobody dies or anything. Right. Just, kind of natural things that happen in life, but it is dramatic for a girl that is.
For a girl that age, yeah. Well, I want to add also that it seemed to me like you grow into yourself, like who you. I don't know for you, but the things that I was brave enough to do when I was 12 are certainly different than the things that I'm brave enough to do now. So like giving young girls this vision that you are an evolving thing. Yeah. Right? Like you can begin your activism, and really that's true for everybody, right? Anybody out there who's like cautious or shy or not ever feeling like they've done X, Y, or Z before. Like you don't have to start like in this big bang thing. We start with who you are. Right. And exactly. You grow it. I think Neva's story was so wonderful. Oh, and the other thing, the grandparents. I love them. I love them.
I had so much fun reading the grandparents. I really, really did. Yeah. And I wanted to show the love they have for one another. They're bickering and going back and forth, but they've been together all these years. They've raised their family. They love Neva and her brother Clay to death. And they're really trying to do the right thing for them. And also, the parents are away in Europe on their music tour. The grandparents are the guardians, and there's a real responsibility in being a guardian. So Neva and her brother want to become more politically active, but the parents have asked the grandparents to sort of keep them in check, and they don't want them to get too involved. And so the grandparents are in a difficult position there.
Christine, talk a little bit about, one of the things that I always want to do as a journalist, as a fiction writer, is to portray Black people in ways that they often don't get to be seen as, right? There's such narrow narratives of the Black experience. I love that Neva's parents are on a European tour, musical tour. And I love that their grandparents, they're not, big mama down south,
right?
And there's no father or you know what I mean? Like
yes,
people who've been married for a long time. Talk a little bit about this family you've created, because each part, even Neva, she's a wordsmith. Like, yes. I love that also. Talk a little bit about you creating these Black characters that we don't, we can't really point to as classic, stereotypes of African family.
Yeah. Well, it's very important to me that we portray the Black community in all of its beauty, and especially Black joy. And so often we don't see the stories that portray the intact families, the love, the nerdy little girl, the parents who are musicians, and the opportunities that they have. The parents had an opportunity to go on a European tour. The mother struggled with that because she didn't want to leave Neva, but in the end, she has her dreams to pursue too. So she goes on the tour, confident that her kids are in good hands because they're left at home with the loving grandparents. And it's not just the family there, it's the whole community, that lovely neighbor, Mr. Charles, who's concerned about what's going on in their household as well. We know all of these stories exist, and it's so important to put these stories out in the world. So I had fun creating Neva, this little girl who's a bit of a nerd, who loves words, who's constantly looking things up in the dictionary and questioning everything everybody says and trying to figure out what words can she use to solve this situation and what words can she use to inflame others. It's just a funny story. And I don't think it's at all an unusual story. It's just a story about a Black girl in her community.
Any autobiographical elements in there?
Oh, there's the question. Very good.
Very good. Well,
there's a journalist in Lori.
I'm not Neva Bean. This isn't my autobiography, but I will say I did experience that first mirror scene, which I'm happy to see that others have experienced as well. So that's the extent of the autobiography.
I was going to say that I do the mirror scene now at my age, but it's not nearly as hopeful. I'm at the mirror going, what's happening here? That's also a continuum, but let's not tell the girls.
That's right.
but they will get there soon enough.
Right.
I'm hopeful and excited about the future, right?
Right. One other thing that's interesting is Neva's body is going through all these changes, and she learns over the course of the book that your body goes through changes throughout your life, right? It doesn't stop, because she realizes that her grandmother is experiencing changes, as is her grandfather. And so that's a big realization to her, to realize that, this is only the beginning. There will be constant changes as I go through life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth? I think that's the thing about writing for kids, right? Like our charge in some way is to give them the space, right? In your quiet book, let's say, in this lovely story about Neva, to be asking themselves, how am I like Neva? What would I do in her situation? Like, find all those spaces. And I think it's also what our charge is to prepare them to grow up, basically, to give them the samples of the stories, to give them, a light to follow. Yeah. This feels like that to me. It feels like a world. Neva's world is one where I want to be embraced when I'm in the pages. That's how I felt. It felt like a warm place to be from beginning to end. I really loved it.
I'm so glad you felt that. I was hoping that that's what people would take away from the book, that you get a feeling of warmth, that you feel like you were embraced.
I was so happy to give this. My daughter is 9 and just 9. And she saw the book and assumed it was hers. And so started reading it. just enjoyed it, and I think it's a little. I mean, because she's not an advanced reader at all, so I didn't know if she would stick with it. But she actually read the whole thing and really enjoyed it. And again, I'm so happy to find books for her. I mean, it's not easy to find books that reflect an intact, happy Black family. Multi-generational at that. And you know, the books are windows and mirrors, obviously, but it is harder to find, you know, books that look like where she sees her family. And our family is particularly unique, you know, because her dad is Spanish and we speak two languages and all this kind of things. But nonetheless, I'm looking for the Black family because that's the family that she kind of has grown up with here.
Right.
And so I appreciated I want to say innocence in this story. And I wanted to just ask about the political activism aspect, because it went only so far in that, you know, it was very real and I felt like it was very age appropriate. But I wonder if you might talk a little bit about why you chose, you know, this topic to make, you know, the activism about. I mean, obviously it's so relevant, but again, this book could be read 5 years from now and people aren't talking about this topic. So why did you choose to make, you know, the kind of Black Lives Matter movement kind of in general, like why did you make that the kind of issue that Clayton, right?
Her brother Clayton, right.
Was involved with?
I think that's because the story is set here in West Philly, and West Philly is this neighborhood that I love, and it is a very progressive, politically aware neighborhood. And so, and another thing I wanted to say earlier was, one day I was looking out the window watching the kids go by, and a young girl who looked like she was about 12 came around the corner on rollerblades, and she was carrying a banner, and the banner said, you know, speak up, speak out. And she would look like she was about 12 years old. So I was impressed by that. And very often when you walk around the neighborhood, you'll see signs up looking for volunteers for this, that, or the other thing. There's all sorts of community organization where people are dealing with very serious issues like food scarcity and homelessness. So I think I was influenced by the neighborhood, by the political activism going on here, that I thought this would be something that a little girl living in this neighborhood would be exposed to.
It's great. And again, I love that. I feel like it's whether people are reading it right now and seeing the correlations with what's actually happening in the world, or whether it's later and you know, this is not such a fresh incident. I just think that that's it's just another aspect of what could happen in life, right? I mean, it's just just another narrative that I thought was just very interesting to explore. And also I like the way you talked about it, that it wasn't, you know, that the parents didn't want their kids to be active, right? They wanted them to be safe, which is what most parents would do. And yet I think a common narrative would be like, all the Black people were like, go out there and, you know, and protest. And yet I feel like you stayed really authentic to what any parents would say. We're not in the country. Mom and dad are old. We don't want them having to chase after the kids, and we want them to be safe. So I really, again, I was, you know, it wasn't what I expected in that sense, that mom and dad would say, no, don't get involved. Like, it could be dangerous.
I struggled with that actually, because I wasn't sure how mom and dad would feel about it. But in light of the fact that they are out of the country, I thought it would be realistic for them to be worried about what could happen while they were so far away. And the grandparents are older, and so they didn't necessarily want to put them in the position of having to deal with any sort of dramatic incidents that could happen with the kids while they were gone. But I also wanted to show that there are, again, different ways of being involved, and even the grandparents are involved in the community.
Right.
So, you know, I don't want to give away the whole story, but the granddad who's so gruff and so on, we learn later in the story that he's very much involved in doing something locally that is extremely significant. Yeah.
Yes. So many little surprises. I loved it. And I have to say, I'm sorry, this is so irrelevant, but as also I was a swimmer growing up, that Clay works at the pool as lifeguard. It's like black people swimming. I mean, Christine, you just bumped like 800 stereotypes in this one book. Like,
there's a pool in the neighborhood and it's wonderful. And that's one of the things I've missed this summer, watching kids go up and down the street, tripping along in their flip-flops and carrying their 2 big towels and all that stuff. I watch them go to and from the swim club.
Yeah. I mean, it's so regular. I mean, it's so natural, but again, it doesn't get documented. So again, this book is just like it's a delight. This story was a delight. That's what I'm gonna just say.
I had fun writing it. I really did.
I when I was reading it, I was thinking that if I were a teacher in a classroom, I'd be thinking about how to pair your book like in a big reader study with Renee Watson's book, because it's the same thing. Like creating an offering of books that is, Renee will call it, Black Girl Joy. Just her newest book, I think, is called Ways to Make Sunshine.
Yes.
Which would be a great pairing with, I think, the definition of Neva Bean. But I think you're right. Just what Lori's saying in terms of bringing forward the actual narrative of people's lives. We go through this in Latino families a lot as well. What gets put out is a very small, a sliver of what the experience is, instead of the full experience of what Latino families look like in this country and what, how we live here.
Right.
But I just think this one just knocked it out of the park in that way. It was I did want to ask you the words, like at the beginning, the definitions, and also how they're in her hair and so on. What drew you to that particular device?
When I first started writing, I didn't have the words there that sort of begin each chapter. But then I thought, hey, this is a girl who loves words. Why not take more advantage of that? And so the words are her way of chronicling what's happening in her world and figuring out what issues she's struggling with. And it sort of frames the whole story, it sort of gave me a nice outline. And then when Pat Cummings did the book cover, it was clear to me she had read the book, because that was her idea to put the words in Neva's twist. And I think that's so well done. It's cover is beautiful.
Yeah. Pat's amazing.
Yeah,
she really is amazing. And I didn't realize that she had done the cover. How lucky! That's just a great thing for you.
So many wonderful people on my team. It's great.
Speaking of your team and loving words, Christine, can you share, because I feel like your story, like Christine and I met in a writing group. Yeah,
right, yes.
I forget how we get, but can you just share like what your path to becoming a writer? Because I feel like that is such an inspirational story in and of itself, and I feel like it's not Neva's story at all, but it's this idea of becoming, right?
Yes, right.
We're always becoming. So can you just share a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. I used to write stories when I was a little girl. And I remember the summer that I was 9, I carried around one of those black and white composition books the whole summer. And I was writing stories all summer long. And the only story that survived is A Cat Named Kitty, which no one has ever heard of. And probably no one should ever be forced to read the original title, right? A Cat Named Kitty. But I put all of that aside and then went on out in the world. And I had this very long career with law firms, major law firms, where I was involved with recruitment of attorneys for big Wall Street law firms. And then I moved into associate relations and then diversity management before I left. And I had a wonderful career, which expanded a very long time. But then I got to a point where I wanted to do something more creative. And I wasn't quite sure what that was, but I started taking writing workshops. And it all just sort of came back to me. And I said, yes, this is what I want to do. And so at first I thought I was going to try to write children's picture books. And I am still trying to write children's picture books. I have to say they're hard.
It's a tough road. It's a tough road.
They're really hard. But I had the good fortune to go to a writer's workshop led by Andrea Davis Pinkney from Scholastic. And I went into the workshop, with my little picture books that I had been working on. And over the course of that week, Andrea had us start writing a short story based on a photograph that we had brought into the workshop. And so I was very tentative. I didn't know what I was doing, but I started writing what later became the first page of my first novel, Riding Chance. And so Andrea said to me at the end of the week, you have a story to tell here. You're a novelist and I'd like to see it. So I thought, what? A novelist? What is she talking about? I have no idea how to write a novel. But she believed in me. And so I went out from that workshop and I went home and I just started writing. So I think, Lori, I may have met you maybe a year or so later after I was deep into that process of figuring out how to write. Mm-hmm. So I had someone who believed in me. And maybe I wasn't afraid, okay? I wasn't afraid to take the risk. I just put myself out there. I remember when I went home and I started writing, I was talking to one of my brothers about it, and I told him I was writing a novel. And he said, do you know how to write a novel? And I said, no, but I'll figure it out. And I did figure it out. So you got to take risk.
Isn't that a terrible question when you're early in your career and just breaking in? You know, people will say things like, have you published anywhere that I know? Or they'll say things like, what books have you, like things like that, that they are asking you to prove if you're a writer in some way. And really, you're a writer the minute you sit down and take yourself seriously and begin writing. Like whether you get published or not, that's a whole other definition and so on. I think that the act of taking yourself seriously, as you did with Andrea, was the key. And well, how lucky to be with Andrea Pinkney. She's amazing.
Yes, she was wonderful. And so it took me a year to create that first draft, and I submitted it to her, and it came back to me all marked up, right? Which is what it should.
Yeah, they do that.
And I went back to work on it. But now that I think about it, that first book is sort of a companion piece to this second book, Neva Bean, because that book takes place in Philadelphia. It's about a 13-year-old young Black boy now who's trying to figure out who he is. So when I think about, how this book could be used, I think that Neva Bean could really be read as a companion volume to Riding Chance.
Mm-hmm.
I still remember Riding Chance's cover. That beautiful sort of hand, the horse's face. Yeah. Oh, it was a silhouette. I think I have it. Anyway, hello, Heather.
I jumped back in because we have some great questions.
Oh, good.
And I do want to say we have a lot of seeing all of our librarian friends and educators. So just a little shout out. Christine does do school visits, even virtual ones. But sort of back to what you were saying, somebody was also asking how you could use this book. You could like a mother-daughter book club, but there's so much also with vocabulary, I guess you could do in the school. Can you sort of speak a little bit to how you see that being used?
Yeah, I guess my first thought is you could encourage young people to really question the use of language and try to understand the power of words, right? Because words can inspire, words can bring joy, but words can also wound. And so I just like to encourage people to think very carefully about the words and how we use words in our world and what our purpose is behind them. But I also think mother-daughter book clubs, mother-daughter discussions could be had surrounding the book, because the mother experiences some guilt because she's away in Europe and Neva is at home pining for her, and she's unsure about whether she should have left or not, but she still has her dreams. And should she have been expected to give up her dream, and so on. So there are lots of questions there that could be explored.
Yeah. So we have another question. Actually, there were two questions like this. One was from Kate Adams. This is from Courtney. You mentioned how it was harder to write a second book as opposed to a first. What made the second book more difficult?
Yeah, I think when I wrote the first book, I was totally naive. I had simply jumped into it, excited, because somebody thought that I could do this thing. Andrea Davis Pinkney saw something in me. She inspired me. So I jumped in almost without thinking. And it was a lot of hard work, but I got through it. So then when the second book came around, I had this fear, this concern that, can I do it again? Maybe I just lucked out, right? Am I really a writer? Can I put another novel together? So I, in many ways, put all these pressures, stresses on myself the second time around that I didn't have that first time. I think that's what made it a lot harder.
Well, you rose to the occasion and set the bar even higher. So we have another question. This is from Wendy Woodhall, who's my sister. Would Wendy consider revisiting Neva's continued development down the road? And because she's my sister, I'm going to just tag on to that. Or potentially Clay's.
Now Clay is Neva's brother. For everyone who hasn't read the book, Clay is Neva's brother. And I enjoyed writing about their relationship because, in the beginning he sees her and she feels humiliated because he saw her in front of the mirror. But they have a very good, supportive relationship, and it's lovely throughout the course of the book. And so I hadn't thought, to answer Wendy's questions, I hadn't really thought about revisiting Neva, but I have to say I love her. I love her as a character, so it might be interesting to see what happens to Neva moving forward. So I'm open to that.
Selfishly, I was thinking I would like to see the adult novel about Neva's traveling parents.
The European tour.
Yeah, the one where the mother who, put her kids first and then later in life followed her dream. That's the book I want to read too.
So Jennifer would like to know, what grade is Neva in?
All right, Neva is Neva is 12. She's still in middle school.
About 7th grade?
Yeah,
yes, 7th grade. Yes.
Does it say that in the book? Does it?
It doesn't say that in the book because it's over the summer, so I'm not really thinking full, right?
But I have to say I like that because I feel like, kids develop and stuff at different ages, and not having the age on there, in my head as a bookseller anyway, made that really nice because it wasn't going to age anybody out, or do you know what I mean? So yeah. I like that you did that, and I did notice that because I kept thinking, there's no age, and that was really good. More questions. You can fill in with questions while I'm looking if anybody has questions there.
Well, I was going to say, Christine, that sometimes people will ask me something about my characters or something that I've written in a book, and I have to think for a minute because I don't remember that I wrote it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I'll go, what was that character's name? And it's amazing because you spend so much time in that world and it's so real to you for a while. But then, time marches on.
Time marches on. Breathe a little bit.
If somebody asked me how old different characters are, I would have to think myself too.
So here's a great question. Taylor wants to know, I think it's clear that girls will love and be empowered by Neva. What do you hope boys will take away?
That is a very good question. There are a couple of boys in the book. There's Neva's brother, Clay, who plays a major role in the story. His friend, Anton, who also is very important, especially to Neva's political awakening. And then, of course, Granddad and his friend, Mr. Charles. So I think boys will see themselves in the book. And they also can see how Neva's brother, even though he's older than she is, and a bit more sophisticated, there is a character arc for him in the story as well. He learns things over the course of the story. So I think anyone can enjoy this book, a boy as well as a girl, as well as adults.
Yeah, I feel like, and I do hope that people don't think that just because the main character is a girl, that somehow that eliminates the possibility of boys getting the same message. I mean, boys should be reading about girls and vice versa. Then there wouldn't be so much bad communication between the two and misunderstanding. So I think that there's no reason that a boy couldn't read this book and just enjoy it because Neva Bean is a great character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm with Lori 100%.
Yep. And Taylor has another question. I love this question. Can you talk about the setting and how this beautifully drawn West Philly neighborhood informed the story?
Right. Yes, I think I touched on that a little bit earlier. West Philly was very much in my mind as I wrote the book, and there's no question I was going to set it here. And it's a lovely neighborhood, and it's a diverse neighborhood, and it's vital and interesting, and it's close to the University of Pennsylvania, so you've got that dynamic going on there. It's not too far from Center City, and it's a lovely community, somewhat self-contained, but also in this larger city of Philadelphia. And so I think Neva spends most of her time in the book in West Philly, but she also ventures out a little bit.
So Courtney wants to know, what kind of techniques did you learn from writing workshops? Is there any workshops you would recommend?
Wow, I learned so many things from writing workshops, and I still attend them because I think they're very, very useful. One of the things that I've learned is that there needs to be some development in a character over the course of the story. Oh, here's a good example. When I first did the rough draft of writing Chance and I sent it to my editor, she liked the voice of the character Troy in writing Chance, but she said he's the same kid at the beginning of the story, at the end of the story, that he was in the beginning. And so we really want to see some growth in the character. We really want to see some development in the character. So I learned that there needs to be a character arc. Characters need to learn something. And in Neva Bean, I try to have most of the characters learn something, not just Neva, not just her brother Clay, but I think Nana, her grandmother, learned something, granddad learned something. So I try to show how everyone is capable of growth and development over the course of the story. In terms of workshops that I would recommend, if you're interested in writing for children, I can't say enough about SCBWI, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. And I see Meg nodding her head. It's an absolutely spectacular organization.
Okay, so this is for Christine, but I'm actually going to ask everybody, since you're all writers. Christine, have you started the third novel? And Meg and Lori, what are you working on now? So a little bit goes out to everybody.
I've started the third novel, but I'm having a hard time focusing, maybe because I was busy with this launch and because of what's going on in the world. But I'm really hoping that through this fall and winter, I can seriously buckle down and make some progress on a third book, which will be another middle grade novel.
Awesome.
Lori, what are you working on?
I actually am working on a novel that I have been working on. So sad when you go back into the computer and it says, welcome back. And it's like, it's been 5 years. But the last time you were here was 2014. I'm working on a novel that takes place in Philly that celebrates diversity and kicks rocks at racism. But it's an adult novel. So I really, I made my COVID promise to myself to, use a little bit of the time that, because we're at home, to just get it done and get it out in the world. Because believe it or not, even though it's been sitting there for 5 years, I think it's more relevant than it ever would be. Even, that today it would be more relevant.
Right.
Yeah. It is a hard time to write, though. There are so many distractions, like emotional distractions.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There are so many things that are really draining us in really, really big ways. So it's hard when you're writing anything and trying to, I think like the impulse to create has to come from a place essentially of hope inside of you. Right. Mm-hmm. Like there's some sort of light in there. And so, I find that it's been hard. I've tried really hard to stay focused on writing. But there are days when I just can't, and then I try to do other kinds of things. I'll respond to emails. I'll do, work on presentations. I'll do those kinds of logical things that don't involve invention. But for me, what I'm working on now is, so the follow-up to Merci Suarez Changes Gears is coming out in the spring. It's called Merci Suarez Can't Dance. So that's exciting. And then I am working on in my computer right now, I'm working on the last, what I think will be the last Mercy book, the third book. So we'll have one of her 6th grade year, one of her 7th grade year, and one of her 8th grade year. And so that's been fun, and it's scary because I'm going to be closing the arc, right? So there's the arc for the character, the arc for each novel, and now this arc for these 3 books together. What happens to a young girl from 6th grade to 8th grade?
It sounds wonderful. I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, well, we should talk about it often. We can, I'll have some days that I'll be pulling my hair out. You know how it is. All of you know how it is. I'll walk away from it and decide. And that whoever asked us that question earlier, Christine, about what made the second book harder, I had to laugh because you're right. The second book is really hard. But you know what? That feeling of, I can't do this. It just, I'm waiting for that feeling to leave me at some point, because every time you come to the blank page, you have that worry somewhere in there. Like it was a fluke. It's all been a mistake.
And I think, Christine, also what you said about the first novel, I've written 1 novel. This is my second novel. And the first one, you're like, I wrote a novel. Like, that's all you're trying to do. Yay! Yes, exactly. Like, yay! But now you're like, now I gotta write a good novel because
right. And you got to write a novel that no one will say, well, her first novel was better than this one. Like, that cannot happen. No. Right. So it's stuff like that. It's such a psychological.
Need a support group.
Yeah. I think run by independent bookstore owners like Heather.
I like that. So here is, I think we'll make this the final question because I like this question. How do you get these books in schools? Because yes, that is where they belong. They belong in schools. They belong in people's homes. I would say call us here at Children's Book World. Call your local independent bookstore. Your neighborhood bookstore can help you get books into schools. Absolutely. And that is where they belong. And I just want to thank you all. This was a delightful way to spend an evening. Really fun. So happy this is in the world, Christine. I really, really am. I can't thank you enough, Meg and Laurie, for being here and supporting Christine and supporting us by being here. It's just terrific. So,
of course,
I just really appreciate it.
Terrific.
Heather, again, thank you. And Children's Book World, one of my favorite bookstores.
My pleasure. Thank you. We just love you. So go put your feet up and everybody enjoy the rest of your night.
Okay, thank you.
Bye. Bye, Laurie. Bye, Christine. Blessings.